I've always been really fascinated by theme park rides. Not necessarily how thrilling they are, but their design. Their theming, storytelling, ride mechanics, how detailed their roofs are, that stuff. And on a recent trip, I got to check out some pretty cool theme parks, including Super Nintendo World, which will soon be unveiling a Donkey Kong minecart coaster. And I thought, I want to make something like that. Welcome back to a long overdue Midnight Hobbies video, and today I'll be making my own interpretation of a mini Donkey Kong minecart coaster. That's a mouthful. And to start off, I'm actually going to make a plan. Since we're playing with the zany logic of a video game, I thought it would be fun if the base of the coaster was a precarious stack of rocks, with the coaster track zipping through with broken track pieces inspired by Donkey Kong Country. And once I had a rough understanding of how the track layout would work, I went over it with a fine liner so that my monkey brain wouldn't confuse it for rocks later on. Kinda looks like a blender. Anyway, moving outside, I collated what I had left of this troublesome XPS foam. Once I had a good piece for the base of this base, I shaved off the corners and edges to give it a more earthy look, and went in with a bowl of foil to give it a delicious rocky texture. The same was done for these smaller pieces that would be used to structure the main chunk of the rocky rise. I then stabbed them with wires and glue and began playing this unorthodox game of stacks on, making sure to hide any of those wires with some small stone pieces. I made the upper frame before gluing it onto the rest, added this boulder.
That is a nice boulder.
And wow, looks just like the drawing. It just needs some meat on its bones, so I bulked up the stack by adding a lot of perfectly curated stone pieces, which took me so long that this did end up being a quite literal midnight hobby.
He said it!
I mean, for a blender, it's looking pretty good. I tore up these little pieces I wanted to add to my plaster mixture for some extra rocky grit, but I ran out of plaster, so my mixture was so watery it didn't quite work. The base was drowned in the watery mix to help give it some strength and prime, and then I went in by hand to add those little pieces. And funny thing about making a precarious structure is that it is, in fact, precarious. Who could have guessed? The watery mixture had made the top super heavy, and the glue on the wires wasn't actually adhering to the foam very well, but a simple drill placed behind it as it dries overnight should do the trick. And would you look at that? Success! Just for safety though, I did shake up a bottle of watered down Mod Podge and paint and spritzed the whole thing to Kingdom Come. It still fell apart when I primed it though. None the matter, we can just lather it with more glue and hope nothing happens again. I went in with more little pieces to hide gaps in wire before realising the track was going to need some beam supports. Now that's art. I trimmed off the rounded ends of these crafting sticks before finding the right sized beam and multiplying. I then trimmed thin strips of the sticks to be the cross beams on the track. I know for trains they're called sleepers, but is that the same for a coaster? I don't think they could sleep with people screaming around them all day. Anyway, we're not here to talk about trains, we're here to make crafts. Even though it felt unnatural to be painting this early in the process, I touched up the wood pieces with a darkened raw sienna so that I could get ahead of not needing to paint them all when stuck in place. And I left them to dry, leaning on another stick just to assure none of them stuck to the paper. And with my new marimba up to scratch, it was time to move on to the stones. Now I was very excited to paint the stones because I knew it was mostly going to be many layers of dry brushing, which is my fuel for existence. But in terms of narrating, there's not much to say except I went in with increasingly lighter shades of grey with less and less paint on the brush, before finishing with a plain white to top those delicious edges, making sure to knock out some rocks that were still waiting for the glue to dry too. I'll get them later. And now that I was dry brushing, I kept the good times rolling and moved on to giving all of the wood pieces a tickle with a lightened mixture of the base colour, and then started gluing all of the supports in place as to where I thought they would best accommodate the track. I then trimmed the leftover support beams to support the supporters, and now all this thing needs is a track. I cut the lengths of wire to suit each section and bent up the ends where the track had broken. I glued them onto the supports and held them down with pegs so that they'd stay where I wanted them without me needing to hold each section for an hour like I usually tend to do. I then decided against the loop at the top and continued to twist and glue the rest of the track in place. I trimmed the excess and then moved on to gluing on the beams, where I initially tried to hold it in place, but... So I opted to hold the model upside down and glue the beams that way, which worked a treat. Aside from the part where I ran out of beams and needed to make a whole lot more. But then I was back on track, pun intended, making sure to add some split beams at ends where the track had gone haywire, and with all the beams in place, it was time to make the minecarts. I wanted something simple, so with some leftover packaging from my last monstrosity, I sketched out a template for the cart. This was cut and glued together, followed by some trim at the bottom and foam board wheels. It got covered in black Mod Podge and silver, followed with a classic grime up. And just so we can spell it out that it is in fact a Donkey Kong coaster, we're gonna add a sign. Using more crafting sticks, I made this back plate that would sit up the top and hold the DK logo, which I also built up with more sticks, using the printed version as a guide. All of the bits got the typical paint and dry brush treatment before I went in with a black wash for the logo, as it was looking just a little too light for my liking, dabbing away the excess as I went. I then stuck all of the pieces in place, chucked in some of the leftover beam pieces for detail, and now this thing was ready for a ride on my new turntable. It's good to be back. I hope you enjoyed this video, everyone. I thoroughly enjoyed this build and might even make more ride miniatures in the future. So let me know in the comments what sort of wacky or twisted ride builds you'd like to see. Who knows, maybe I'll just build my own miniature theme park. All the best, everyone, and I'll catch you at the next video.